Begin Self-Publishing, episode number 56. Selling Publishing Rights with Orna Ross.
Interested in self-publishing but don't know where to start? Want to get your book onto Amazon? Want to hold your paperback book in your hands? Learn how on the Begin Self-Publishing podcast with your host, Tim Lewis.
This week I talked to Orna Ross, who is the director of the Alliance of Independent Authors, and is also an author of poetry and literary works herself, as well as also the author of several books about self-publishing, the latest of which is a book about selling publishing rights, which she's co-authored with Helen Sedwick, who's been on the show before to talk about legal matters. I talked to her this week about what publishing rights are, and why self-publishers should consider them after they've had a small amount of success. And now over to the interview. Hello, Orna, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for having me.
You've recently co-authored a book about publishing rights. In the simplest terms, what are author publishing rights, and why should authors worry about them?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is that you don't need to worry about them all that much when you're starting out. So publishing rights essentially is the right to publish. It's exactly what it says on the tin. And traditionally, what has happened is that publishers have licensed the rights from authors and created books, audiobooks, and all the other kinds of rights, which we'll be talking about in a while, that can derive from a book. Self-publishing has changed that quite a bit because now authors are publishing their own, native language right, if you like. So writers in English are publishing in English in stores all over the world, which wouldn't have been possible before. You would have had to sell your rights to a foreign publisher, or you would sell your rights to a global publisher who would then pay you more and take your book to Africa, Australia, or wherever. So the short answer to your question is it is the right to publish a book. It's actually the right to license the rights to publish a book, actually, and it rests on the concept of copyright. So without the legal protection of copyright, authors wouldn't actually be able to earn any money from their writing. It's that allows us to trade in rights.
What kind of rights can an author potentially sell? Obviously, they probably want to keep the English language rights in wherever they're from, but what other rights can people sell? Well,
I'm going to talk from a self-publisher's perspective, I think, mainly. Now, at the Alliance of Independent Authors, we have a number of indie authors who use trade publishing for some contracts and self-publishing for other contracts. But I'm just going to focus mainly on self-publishing, and then we can tap into some of the other things that happen in the home territory at the end if we have time for that. So essentially, as a self-publisher, what you will do is, generally speaking, and not fully knowing what you're doing probably at the beginning, put your book up on Amazon. Because that is the primary outlet for self-publishing. And by doing that, that automatically takes your book in English to a number of different territories if you wanted to. So you get to select your territories on your dashboard. And a similar thing pertains with Kobo, one of the other main digital publishers. ALLi Books, which would be the other main one that people tend to go directly to, and then Draft to Digital or Smashwords or Publish Drive would take the book further afield. So that's self-publishing. That's where you don't sell your rights. You keep your rights. You sell these people that I'm talking about, Amazon, Kobo, and so on, as your listeners well know, are not publishers. You are the publisher. They are really distributors. They take your book out to the reader. And while people talk about royalties in relation to that, actually it's not strictly a royalty, it's a commission that they take for the privilege, and that varies. Okay, so that's English language rights. Now, before, what would have happened there is that you would sell to the publisher in your home territory more than likely. if you wanted to sell the English language version in Australia, you would either have to talk to another publisher in Australia, or your agent would, or their sub-agent would. And similarly, all the other territories where you wanted to sell an English language version. And there was quite a difference between the English language version that would be sold in the US, for example, and in the UK. The covers would be different. Sometimes the book would be edited differently and cut differently and so on. And then in Europe, you might find two different versions of the same book. So it was a very complicated and unwieldy sort of scenario. And I say was, and that's not strictly right, because it's still very much with us. So it's rights have been simplified for the self-publisher. Traditionally, you sold rights to lots of different people, under lots of different agreements with different sorts of return, and it was all kind of very complicated, and very often authors just steered clear. They didn't get involved at all. They used an agent to do it, or else their core publisher did it. They sold all their rights to their home territory publisher and kind of left them to do it. Having said that, in the doing of things that way, a huge amount of money was left on the table, to use the business terminology, because it's not an efficient system, the old trade system. And neither actually is it a fully efficient system now, but at least now you can take more responsibility. So in addition, you asked me, I am getting to the point, in addition to the English language rights then to your book, which is essentially now in self-publishing put out just one way, then there is foreign rights. So that will be a translation of that book. There are TV and film rights. If a company or a producer wanted to option the book and to turn it into a TV or a movie, authors always get very excited about that particular kind of right and seem to love it, but very complex TV and film, and very often, an option is bought on the book, but actually that's all that ever happens. I know of a number of authors who've had 3, 4, 5 options on the same book without the film ever being made. They got paid each time, but they would actually have loved to have seen it go further than that. They're the main rights, and audiobook rights, of course, which is changing again considerably because you've got good self-publishing options for audio now, which was very difficult before. Only, a very, very few choice select books that were considered right to the audio market were ever offered an audiobook deal in the past. What has emerged very much to a lot of people's surprise is that there's a much bigger market for audio than people realised before. Traditionally, audiobooks were seen as something for people who, were blind, couldn't see, or, couldn't read in traditional ways, or braille, or else, older people who, had just kind of got too lazy to read. So now there's a huge market of young people and people in their cars listening to books, and Amazon, with their WhisperNet technology, makes it very easy for you to move from the ebook to the audiobook and back again. So audio is being sold now in quite a different way as well. But there are still audiobook companies purchasing books. Andy Weir's book, The Martian, actually grew out of an audiobook deal. The ebook was doing okay, but it was when Podium purchased the audiobook rights and did a really good job on it that it really kind of took off and came to the attention of Hollywood and sold film rights, and then sold a publishing deal, for a sort of world English language rights.
If somebody had already self-published the book with English language rights in that way, can they then sell on the rights, English language rights, later in the way to what seems like Andy Weir did with The Martian?
Yes, you can. You most certainly can. And indeed, if your book is doing well, you're more than likely going to get an offer for that. What we often see with members is that they're just kind of ahead of the posse. So publishers tend to come in and make you that offer when you are at the point where you don't need the offer. So Hugh Howey actually spoke very amusingly about this, the way in which, had he had the offer 6 months earlier, he would have jumped on it. But each time the offer was coming in, it was kind of lagging behind what he had managed to do for himself. So yes, it's very possible. And what also happens is Amazon Publishing keeps an eye on what is selling well in the self-publishing realm, and they often make, they are the trade publishing wing of Amazon, and they often make an offer to self-publishers who are doing well. And, we see quite a few of our members going across, taking trade deals, and then coming back to self-publishing or staying with that trade publisher, or maybe using the trade publisher and happy to use it for one series, but self-publishing another series. But the short answer to your question is yes, you most certainly can sell those English language rights. Again, there's still, self-publishing does not preclude you selling those rights to somebody else down the line.
Okay. So if an author is interested in selling their rights to the books, how do they start looking for people to actually buy them, or should they wait for people to come to them?
Generally speaking, in negotiation, it's always better to wait until somebody comes to you. However, having said that, it very much depends. So you could wait and maybe they won't come. And what we're finding mostly, I think, is that it's not English language rights so much that people are going out and trying to sell, but a number of our members have very successfully sold their translation rights in a number of different countries. And they've done that in a variety of ways. So the two main ways is you find an agent who will do that work for you. So somebody who is, good on foreign rights. And ALLi actually works with an agent to try to do that for our professional members. They are members who've sold more than 50,000 books in the last year or two. Toby Mundy kind of works on their behalf and sells their rights. We have other members who absolutely don't want an agent involved at all. They approach publishers directly themselves. They are usually people who are happy with, a number of small deals. So they're not looking to make a big sale of foreign rights. They're happy to get a few £1,000s on each, and they do the Italian and they do the German and they do the Spanish, and they feel that if they get 10 or 20 of these under them, that's a nice supplement to what they're doing already. Having said that, it's not for the faint-hearted. You're back to the query system, you're back to the rejection thing, you're back to needing to get to know different territories, and different publishing territories operate in different rules, and copyright is not as strongly embedded in some territories as it is in others. So it's only something to take on if you kind of enjoy it, and for a lot of writers, it's just their idea of hell. They would absolutely hate it. So they tend to use an agent.
Okay, and are the agents a different kind of, are there different foreign rights agents to just normal agents who would be people that authors would be trying to plug to for a traditional sort of English language book deal?
Yeah, they in a bigger agency, in a small agency, you might find the same person does both, but typically once an agency reaches any sort of size, the foreign rights person or department indeed is dedicated, because it is a very specialist area, and it's something that all of this runs very much still on personal relationship. So the foreign rights agents attend the book fairs, they tend to know each other, they know who's buying what, they know what does well in Germany, doesn't do well in Japan. It's that kind of expertise that is built up over quite some time. So yeah, it's specialist, and it tends to be a different person. So you find them in Writers and Artists Yearbook and the Writers Market and those kinds of directories. And very often an agent, if you sign with a literary agent in your home territory, let's say London for as we're both there, so you sign with an agency in London because you want them to sell your English language rights here in London. If you actually do that, you will be dealing with a different person when it comes to the foreign rights. Similarly, your English language publisher will be trying to take those rights, the foreign language rights, And your agent, if they're doing a good job, will only allow them to do that if they have a plan for the book. So everyone in publishing is trying to get hold of the rights, because you never know when a right will actually, you never know when a book is going to do well, and you never know when rights will suddenly come to be in demand. So a publisher will just, as a matter of default, try and hoover up as many rights as they possibly can. And it's your job as an author, if you're in the negotiation yourself, or it's your agent's job if they're representing you, to retain as many of the rights as you can for yourself. But just as publishers shouldn't take them if they don't have a plan to exploit them, in a way you shouldn't keep them unless you have a plan to exploit them too. So it's a matter of negotiation always.
Yeah, but obviously if you're giving up rights, then you should have some sort of compensation for that, really, shouldn't you? So if somebody comes to you and says they want every other territory apart from the UK and the US for all rights or something, then that's not quite the same as if they want them just for Italy, for Italian speakers.
Oh, completely different. And I mean, what you're seeing in relation to English language rights over the last 5 to 10 years is a complete erosion of the distinctions that used to be made. So now people are being offered the same sort of money for world rights, world English language rights, which would include US, Commonwealth, everywhere, essentially, the world, and not being given the compensation for that. That's the sort of the ground zero approach at the moment. So, yeah, you've got to be a bit canny about this. So, as I said at the beginning, I don't think it's something that if you're just starting self-publishing, if you're on your first book or even your second book, I don't think it's something that you need to get too exercised about, except from the perspective, I think it's good to take a rights perspective from the start. So to be aware that there are such things as rights, that it is the accumulation of all of these rights that actually makes a book valuable. And some books, of course, are much more amenable to selling the rights in various ways than others. Some books just don't have much chance on the rights market. And if you haven't sold well as a self-publisher, if it hasn't done well for you in your home territory in English, it's not likely at all that you will find a buyer. So you have to, first of all, publish in English, get good at selling books in your home territory, then it's a sort of a next stage thing.
Okay. So should authors be practicing a pitch for their books? And would you need a different pitch depending on what kind of rights they're trying to sell?
Yes, I think definitely, and also depending what territory. So every author should have a pitch for their book. You should be able to describe your book in 1 sentence, in 3 sentences, in a paragraph, and in a page if you're going to be querying anybody about your book. So definitely, rights discussions start with a pitch page. That includes the cover, price, the date of publication, synopsis, any good reviews, anything that, and any facts or figures that say why this book is worthy of somebody's attention. Rights buyers are inundated with material. So your pitch needs to be good, and it needs to be targeted at them. You need to understand their needs as a buyer, what they're looking for, and make sure that you're not pitching them something that happens all the time. Authors pitching stuff that, to completely the wrong people. Yeah. So you've got to do all that basic stuff first of all. And then if you're pitching, say, the merchandising rights to, a children's book, say, you're going to take a completely different approach than if you're pitching the French rights to a literary novel. It's going to be a whole different way of approaching it. So it's very much about understanding your book from a rights perspective, getting a realistic sense of where your book is placed in the market. And these are not bad things for a self-publisher to know anyway. I think the more objectivity we can get about our books and the more we understand you and I were talking before we came on about the difficulty of marketing fiction compared to non-fiction. The more we know about the realities of the business, I think the better. And taking a rights perspective on your book is a good way to think about your book. And so to begin self-publishing with, okay, now I'm going to do digital rights in English. And when I have that done, I'm aware that this kind of book is actually doing well in, Germany at the moment. That kind of way of thinking about your book and looking at your book is not a bad way to sort of be. But I wouldn't be worrying about rights. I wouldn't be investing time and money in rights until you have at least 3 books under your belt and you're selling at a level that, excites you. That's the point in time when you begin to think about exciting others.
Okay. And if we have, say, a different situation where an author's maybe published 2 or 3 books and they've been doing reasonably well, and a publisher approaches them and wants to buy some kind of rights off them, how do they go about knowing whether that's going to be a good deal for them and determining, should they be taking advice from somebody like the Alliance of Independent Authors, or how would they know whether they've been offered a good deal or not?
Yeah, yes is the answer to advice. You should get, if you don't know, then definitely you should ask. So there are a number of ways in which you can do that. Yes, the book that Helen and I wrote together about publishing rights gives you a good basic, it's a basic primer in what rights are and what should be there, and what's good under the main clauses that you're likely to see in a contract. Now, obviously, we couldn't and just wouldn't be able to show all possible contracts. And very often with a publishing contract, it's not what's in it that's the problem, it's what's missing. So if you don't understand contracts, you need to get some sort of a sense of what should be there and what you should be looking out for. So there are issues around the advance, royalty level, escalators when your book is sold a certain amount, and reversion. What happens if it's not going well, and how do you get the rights back? They're all key parts of it. If you can't, or it all seems too daunting, or you're not, you're just not interested, it bores you or whatever, once you've had an offer, it's relatively easy to get an agent to represent it, and they can usually get you. An agent will cost you in commission, usually 15% is the lowest level when it comes to foreign rights. It can now be as high as 25% if it's a US deal, usually 15 to 20%. But having said that, they will usually be able to negotiate at least that much more than you will if you're not an experienced negotiator, because negotiation is an art. We do have a chapter in the book about the art of negotiation and how to do it well, because so many authors are so just, they're so delighted when somebody wants to buy their rights. They're, yes, take them, whatever, blah, 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 where do I sign, And we see that's great the day you sign, but, we get a lot of people then, and we get the fallout a year later when
they've sold
payments start coming through.
They've sold their global rights for a bag of magic beans or whatever
Exactly. And they don't realise that that's really important. And I mean, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it doesn't matter, but it could matter. And you've got to approach the contract from the perspective that, what would happen if this really took off? How would I feel? So if you can't, as I said, if it bores you, if it's not your kind of thing, if you're daunted, if legalese makes you feel dizzy, get an agent to do the representation, and look for an agent. You're in a strong position if you have an offer, especially if the offer is reasonably decent. Look for an agent who has experience, and all of that's now so much easier with the internet. All agencies are now online. It's very clear, see what they do, what they don't do, what they've sold recently, and so on. If you are going to get into this and, you want to do it and you enjoy it, and a number of our members love it, they find it really buzzy and really, they're really excited and love totting up the countries. I'm in 25 countries now. If you do want to get into that, there are a couple of subscriptions that it's worth getting. Publishers Lunch is one, and keeping an eye on the trade magazines is important. Publishers Weekly in New York and the bookseller in the UK, attending the book fairs, the major book fairs like London Book Fair and Frankfurt Book Fair, which is the big rights there, the two big rights sales fairs. It's worth doing that. Make a nice catalogue of your books. There's a lot of things you can do to help yourself. It's all there in the book that Helen and I wrote, yeah.
What is the most unusual kind of rights that you heard an author sell?
Yeah, I suppose this is interesting. I suppose the most unusual rights are, generally speaking, the merchandising rights. So, I don't know personally anybody who has sold anything wildly unusual, but when it comes to science fiction and fantasy and children's, all those, that end of the market, you're into what they call merchandising rights. So that would be for figures or for cuddly toys and all that kind of stuff. And it's at that end, it's in those rights that you hear about the unusual ones. But I suppose the most interesting rights story, I think, of the last 10 years is J.K. Rowling and, her creation of Pottermore and how she handled that. From a self-publishing perspective, I think is really, really interesting. I admire it so much, how she did it and retained that control of her own work. And so she did it the other way around, if you like. We have self-publishers who sell the merchandising rights to merchandising agents or to merchandising publishers. But what she did was she had a trade publisher. Indeed, self-publishing wasn't big when she was starting out, but trade publisher for the books, but then she creates Pottermore herself. So that was the one I kind of wanted to highlight.
Did she actually keep hold of the merchandising rights when she sold it to the publishers in the first place, or is it because Pottermore's kind of related, but it's not sort of one of the Harry Potter books, so to speak?
I'm not completely au fait with the ins and outs of the contract, but she certainly, in order for her to be able to do what she did, she knew what she was doing contractually. So she either had a good agent or she knew what to do herself.
Okay. In terms of the book you've written with Helen Sedwick about rights, is that's available on Amazon and other places, isn't it? Or is that only for the Alliance of Independent Authors members?
It's free to members. All our books are free to members, but then they are widely available to purchase. So yeah, it's on Amazon, and anybody can buy it and read it. And yeah. Okay.
So how do people find out about you and the Alliance of Independent Authors if they're interested in finding out more about you?
Well, I'm on ornaross.com, and that's my author website, but it brings everything together. So there's a little bit there about the Alliance, and also I have an interest in creative living and conscious creation, and there's stuff about that on that website too, as well as my fiction and poetry. So that's there. And then the Alliance of Independent Authors is at that website, which is a mouthful, allianceindependentauthors.org. And we also run a self-publishing advice centre now. We used to call it the self-publishing advice blog. There is a blog there, a very dynamic blog run by the able Debbie Young, whom I think you've had on your show before. Yeah. But we also there have the Indie Author Fringe, which is an online conference. We run Fringe to the Frankfurt Book Fair and BEA, Book Expo America, and London Book Fair with a self-publishing focus, because the book fairs don't really have a self-publishing focus nailed as yet. So all of that is there, and our member showcase is there, and lots of other good stuff on selfpublishingadvice.org.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming on the show today, Orna.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please stop by iTunes and rate and leave a review. This helps make the show more visible. For free resources, show notes, and other helpful content, join the community at beginselfpublishing.com.